So, hello BookTube, it's been quite a while, but I'm back and I want to do a recent reads video to catch up with you on my recent reads, because I've read quite a few books and I don't have like a huge amount to say about each one, so I thought rather than doing full reviews, I'd kind of compress it into a shorter recent reads, or a longer recent reads video, but a shorter time per book. And I'll leave a link in the doobly-doo with timestamps for the books individually, so if there's particular books that you're interested in and you don't care about the rest, then you can just skip ahead to those. So let's start off with one of the books I read since my last video, and that was, the longest one ago, was James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain, which to me was a title buy, which is kind of like a cover buy, excepting that instead of going for the cover, I just went for the title, because just the title, Go Tell It on the Mountain, somehow spoke to me, I guess. Anyway, since reading the book, I've realized or come to learn that it's the title of a spiritual song, which I didn't know, or maybe I vaguely knew it, and that's why it was kind of a sentence I was floating in my head. But anyway, yeah, it was a lovely novel. I really enjoyed this. Story of semi-autobiographical novel by James Baldwin, a story about basically his father and his relationship to his father. And it's set during one church service in a Pentecostal church, and kind of has in a series of flashbacks looking at the lives of various characters. And just the way it's written kind of makes it into a really kind of spiritual song of a novel almost. As it's just in the blurb, that wasn't my metaphor. But yeah, it really fits. Lovely novel to read. Really interesting picture of life in the 1930s, or actually the earliest part of the 20th century in America. Yeah, highly recommend it. Then I also read some more non-fiction books. So I read Terry Eagleton's Literary Theory and Introduction, which, as the title suggests, is an introduction to literary theory, which is kind of the theory and the philosophy behind what is literature, what does it do, how does it work, why do we read it, how do we interpret it, and how do we assign value or not. Which all sounds maybe a bit vague, and if you read this book it will still remain a bit vague, because it kind of encompasses a lot of things and it's hard to define. But yeah, it basically introduces the way people have kind of been formally thinking about literature in the broader sense of the term, and what it does and how to interpret a work of literature. Is it possible to interpret it? Does it matter what the author intended or not? And can you see that or not? All those kinds of questions. So it doesn't really go into answering the questions per se, but it looks at how people over the last 100 or so years of literary theory have tried to answer that. So on the one hand it was interesting because it introduced a lot of concepts. On the other hand, a lot of it remained very vague, where I could have helped to have some examples of, like, especially when talking about things like symbolism or deconstructionism, if that's the correct term. It would have been nice to show an example of how deconstructionists applied their theories to a text to really understand what it was all about. But it gives you a starting point if you want to delve a bit more deeper into kind of those fundamental aspects of how literature is understood, and then to think about more philosophically, I'd say, about literature. And then, somewhat in the same vein, I read Edward W. Said's Orientalism, which is not quite the same thing, but it's about how the West has perceived the East, and how both the West and the East have come to kind of be defined as ideas, and kind of that those ideas are constructed. Like, so Said was a sociologist or literary critic, scholar. I'm not quite sure what position exactly was. University Press at Columbia University, where he has taught English and comparative literature. So that's what he was. But he was born in Palestine, as it still was at the time. And in this book, he looks at how both scientists, in the sense of social scientists and biologists, and artists from the West have thought about and written about the East, or the Orient. So mainly what we now call the Middle East, and he talks a little bit about India and China, but it's mainly focused on the Middle East, or the Levant, or Asia Minor, kind of those regions, the former Ottoman Empire. And so yeah, it really goes into that, obviously, geographically speaking, those places are to the east, if you kind of look at, take the prime meridian as your central point, but this idea we have of the East and of Easterners and what that means has really been constructed by how people have written about this area and about the people that live there. And also similarly the West as something that is, kind of opposed to it, and not just kind of how geography happens to be, but the West as a cultural entity has also been kind of constructed, and the opposition between East and West has been highlighted and magnified by the way over the past 2 centuries people mainly from the West have spoken about the East, because that's one of the things that has kind of led to this way of thinking, is that people in the West mainly heard about the East via these experts, Orientalists, who sometimes traveled there or studied languages and documents from the East, and then created this idea and then spread that to the West rather than having direct contact. So yeah, it was a really interesting takedown, a depressingly relevant examination, let's call it. Depressingly relevant for a book written in the late 70s. And I think since things have gotten better, a lot of people who work on those areas of the world or study those areas of the world have read this book, and it's been taken into account in kind of more modern incarnations of these studies. And people are trying not to make the same mistakes, and to be more aware of kind of Orientalism, because it's like a lot of these kind of systemic things. A lot of it's not people consciously deciding to do something horrible, it's just people get caught up in a certain way of writing things and then unconsciously reinforce it. And like many systems, Orientalism is a thing that can reinforce itself, because you start learning about the East within an Orientalist tradition, and then you start writing in the same way yourself. And then the system as a whole propagates it, even though you as a person are not doing anything particularly reprehensible. Right? But so you really have to be really critical of yourself to avoid falling into those kinds of traps. So I think the field has learned from that and has tried to progress. But at the same time, there's still a lot of ways we think about and talk about the East, and also in similar fashion about Africa. Right? Africa is a country. That good concept is kind of similar to some of the things Said describes in Orientalism. So unfortunately still highly relevant to our present day, and an interesting read to think more about these topics. Also, something that struck out to me is, so for those of you who don't know, I am trained as an engineer, I work as a scientist, but I have a degree in aerospace engineering. And so there's this kind of false idea about that you have STEM people and humanities people and never the twain shall meet, and that's rather overdone. But what I did find is the style of both these humanities books, to put it that way, was quite different to kind of the way in argumentation, that's quite different to the style of argumentation that I would expect, and that I write in myself, and I write because I have to write as part of my job. When I make findings, I write journal papers, and yeah, so in that sense I think in kind of hard scientific work, in maths, physics, engineering, there's a style of writing and argumentation where it's a bit more straightforward. You list the points, and then you argue for them, and then you say, okay, and these are my conclusions, A, B, C. Whereas both these books take a more circuitous route, and it's occasionally it is like stated, okay, these are conclusions, but there was less signposting, and there's a lot of examples pulled in which are liked, which are necessary. But somehow, in a way, I can't really put my finger on what exactly was different. It's a different style of argumentation than I was used to, which is not to say it's worse, but just it's different, and it kind of stood out to me. And wondering if that might be where some of the differences between the so-called oppositions between STEM and the humanities come from. Anyway, that was it for the non-fiction portion, and I read some more fiction as well. So, and then I had Easter holidays, and I did a lot of reading over the Easter break. So I got some more fiction read, and 2 books, in fact, that I read over the Easter break were Sayaka Murata's Convenience Store Woman, which was a short read, it's quite a sweet story. You can read it as an affirmation of neurodiversity and celebrating people's right to just be weird and not conform to society's expectation, and that should make them a lesser that doesn't make them a lesser person. Or you can read it as a very depressing expression of late stage capitalism. Up to you, and I'm not going to tell you why because it would kind of spoil the ending, but it's only 150 pages and did really enjoy it, so I can recommend. Yeah, and interesting thing, so the book is really a lot about conforming to social pressures, and it's tempting to go with, that's Japan, and Japanese culture is very big on social conformity, but I think there's still also a lot to reflect on with regards to Western culture and how we treat people that don't fall neatly within society's norms as well. Yeah, highly recommended for that, and a lot of thought packed into a brief novel. And then the other book I read on the Easter break was Hannu Rajaniemi's latest novel, Summerland, which I can highly recommend. I put it in the BookTube Discord as for if you enjoyed The Spy and the Traitor but thought it didn't have enough ectoplasm and occultism and Ouija boards. So this is a alternate history book set in 1938, where there is the discovery of a place called Summerland, and basically discovery of a kind of afterlife where ghosts of dead people go, and through science people are now able to travel and communicate with ghosts and prevent ghosts from kind of spirits, whatever you want to call them, from fading away, but give them kind of an afterlife where they can interact with living people. Right? So it's like one of the main characters, Rachel, she has regular phone conversations, ectophone conversations with her mother, who is dead. And the British Empire also has a presence in the afterlife, so Queen Victoria still rules the British Empire, albeit from the afterlife. And there's a national death service which looks after dead people. You can get a ticket to go to the afterlife and not fade away. But kind of, still have an afterlife where you know who you are. But like I said, it's set in the late 30s. It's an alternate history, so there are a lot of names in here that, if you know a bit about the history of the times, you will recognize, which was cool. I really liked how he wove it in, especially in just quite an imaginative alternate history slash fantasy novel. And you might be wondering, what was that about The Spy and the Traitor? Well, The Spy and the Traitor, if you don't know, is a non-fiction book which we read in November or October with the Discord BookTube Discord. And that was about a real-life KGB agent who became a double agent for the British. And it contained a lot of details of the story of that KGB agent and how he eventually escaped, and created a lot of details about also how tradecraft, so how the spies operated. And this alternate history novel focuses also on a kind of espionage battle between, in this case, the British and the Soviets, and set also with the backdrop of the Civil War in Spain, although then with the British supporting Franco and the Soviets still supporting the Republicans. and yeah, so also the main character is a spy. So it is a spy novel within an alternate history setting, and it really, really reads like a spy novel with dead drops and surveillance and double agents and recruiting assets and things like that. So in terms of the language and the jargon, it really fits the rivalry between MI5 and MI6, then reimagined into this kind of alternate history setting where MI6 basically has a division that is in Summerland, in the afterlife, but it features people like Kim Philby, Mansfield Cumming, and various other names that you will recognize if you're into spy history. Again, highly recommended. Also a lot easier to get into than Rajaniemi's previous trilogy, but still also packs quite some thoughts if you take the time to reflect a bit on what he's written. It's not just a fluffy spy novel with an interesting setting, but it really thinks a bit more about also the meaning of life and memories and fading away. You also recognize some themes that were in the Quantum Thief trilogy, although then recast to fit into kind of the spiritualist mold or world rather than hard sci-fi world. Then finally, there were two books which I read on my e-reader and which we read for the Discord BookTube. Not the Discord BookTube, I keep on saying that, the BookTube Discord. And the first was, and I always get the title wrong in my head, so let me think about it. Red Wolf, Black Leopard, and I'll put a picture here somewhere, which I have very mixed feelings about. So the things I liked, so is that's, if you haven't heard about it, is a fantasy novel, or an African fantasy novel, and I'll get to the square quotes in a second. And to a certain extent, that's plot-wise, it's a semi-traditional plot, so there's a bunch of heroes that need to find a MacGuffin, who in this point is a person, and bring them back. But it's original through its setting, through the characters, and through the way it's told. So the setting I liked a lot because of its originality. At the same time I have some mixed feelings because, like I said, it's marketed as an African fantasy novel, and that's already a bit iffy, aside from the fact we never market things as a European fantasy novel, but also it suffers from the Africa is a country syndrome. So there are concepts and ideas from all over the African continent which are just mixed together and smooshed together into one world. Right, so there are Sangomas, which is a Southern African concept, which is a type of shamanistic person who has access to supernatural medicines and spells. There's also a concept of Mingi, which is a term from specifically southwest Ethiopia, so several thousand kilometers away from anywhere where they have Sangomas. There's some mythical creatures that Marlon James, author, has thought of himself, as far as I could tell by quick wiki search. So yeah, it's always a bit of a mix, and I think it's fine as an author, you're more than welcome to make your own world and to do that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But then branding it as an African fantasy novel, somehow it just didn't sit quite right with me. Then the story itself kept me intrigued. I wanted to read more, especially after the first 100 or so pages. And although at times there was a lot of sex and violence and torture and sexual assault, and some of it kind of felt borderline gratuitous. I thought, like, okay, like I'm okay. I'm not too bothered by violence in the sense that it gives me nightmares or that I feel sick when I'm reading or anything. But I just kind of go like, do we have to? It just doesn't add anything to the story for me if it's overdone. So I kind of had the sense of this story as well. I kind of got a bit annoyed at the main character as well, because he just pathologically can't have a normal conversation with just about anyone. He always goes into full-on asshole mode, which on the one hand I was okay with. Okay, you can have a your main character be an asshole. He doesn't have to be likable, but sometimes you just really want to go, dude, what's your problem? Like, there didn't seem to be anything sparking off this assholishness. There was also kind of a weird mixture where he's on occasion highly misogynistic and on occasion super aware of kind of the oppression women in his society face, and almost and kind of feminist in his views, which kind of conflicted. And again, it didn't quite resolve for me. And yes, I understand that real people are complex and can have conflicting opinions sometimes, but somehow it just clashed. And then the final thing is the way it's told. So the story is told as as if you're listening in on an interrogation to a certain extent, although we only ever hear the voice of the person being interrogated, the titular Red Wolf. And so it's occasionally there are kind of second person narratives where he's speaking to an interlocutor who we never hear from, and most of it is him telling the story. And then we get into what I find really annoying about that, which is the writing style, especially in the first 100 or so pages. Because what Marlon James apparently wants to do is he wants to play with unreliable narrators, which is a cool concept. Apparently this is going to be a trilogy, and we're going to hear the same story from multiple points of view, which has me intrigued, and I'm still intrigued enough by the story that I'll probably give the second book a go at some point, although it won't be high on my priorities list. So I'm all up for that. But then I'm not quite sure what he's trying to do with the writing style, because I can do experimental writing styles, right? I enjoyed a lot of Italo Calvino's works, or the two works of Italo Calvino that I've read. I've read and enjoyed The Sound and the Fury, but Faulkner, if you've read The Sound and the Fury, you know the first section of that is super confusing because it's stream of consciousness and in a thought pattern with a person who does no concept of time, everything just blurs together. And so it's really confusing to read, but at the same time there was a clear reason why Faulkner was doing that, right? He was trying to get across this completely different way of thinking. And it works in the context of that story. Whereas Marlon James here, I'm not quite sure what he was trying to do, because, okay, it's this witness that we're supposed to distrust telling us a story. Fine. But if you want to make it sound like an oral retelling, then the character shouldn't speak in dialogue, right? Because that's not an oral retelling. If you ask me, oh, did you speak to so-and-so today? I won't say, yes, I said, quote, blah, blah, blah. Then he said, quote, blah, blah, blah. No, you say, well, I wished him good morning and he said how he was doing. Right? You don't give direct quotes. So it's obviously not what he's writing down. And that you want to make it confusing because you want to highlight the narrators are unreliable, fine. But if you have a section of dialogue where you have no dialogue lines, no dialogue tags, no he said, A said, B said, A said, B said, you just have line breaks, then the normal convention is that if you have closing quotation marks and then a line break and then a new set of quotation marks, it means you've switched the speaker, right? And you have two speakers, and the way you keep track of who said who is because you alternate speakers as you go down the line. But there are dialogue sections in this book where the only way the dialogue makes sense is if that convention is broken and actually two subsequent lines are said by the same speaker. And then I got really annoyed. So this you're purely doing to confuse me as a reader, right? There's no other reason for this. And it just makes the work unnecessarily hard. Yeah, sure, maybe you want to remind me that I need to be distrustful of what I'm reading, but it just made it annoying to read. Right? There were better ways of doing that in my view. So all of that together, so I was intrigued by the setting. I thought it was original, nice to read something from a different setting like that. But at the same time, I'm a bit iffy about the construction of the setting. The story had me intrigued. There were some characters that I liked and some characters I liked disliking. But I got at times really annoyed by the writing style. So all in all, mixed feelings about the book. and when the next part comes out, I may or may not give it a try. In the sense, I'm not against it, but you know, if I have a huge pile of books to read, and who doesn't at the time, it probably won't be high on my priorities list. And then, in the final book I want to talk to you about is The Thing Around Your Neck by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Again, the picture here, which we're going to be discussing this weekend with the BookTube Discord Book Club, and I had a lovely time buddy reading it with Sofia. I hope I got your name correct, from said Discord server, community, whatever you want to call it. Yes, it's a short story collection with some real gems and some stories that were okay on their own but got a bit repetitive because a lot of the stories deal with immigration, especially Nigerians going to America. I think all of them, they go to America, they never go to the UK or any other countries Nigerians could potentially go to. And then a lot of them are about women going to America to marry a man or getting into a relationship in America and then discovering things aren't quite as they'd hoped or expected. So there were a lot of stories that kind of fine on their own, but when it's like the third or fourth story in that vein that you've read, you it just kind of got a bit repetitive. But all in all, still an enjoyable collection, and you know, it's a common theme, short story collections, that you're never going to like all the stories. Be interesting. So I haven't read Americana myself, and I think because this was a reread for me, and I definitely enjoyed it more than the first time I read the collection. I think there were more themes that I picked up on now of feminism and of immigration and race issues that I missed the first time, and so it added more to the stories that I was able to pick up on them now. But I think also this collection is the reason I never picked up Americana, despite really liking Purple Hibiscus and Half of a Yellow Sun. Because yeah, after reading this collection, I got a bit burnt out on the whole Nigerian immigrant experience in the US theme. So when I heard about there being a novel by Adichie on that theme, I was like, yeah, not right now. And then, of course, too many other books to read. So who knows, maybe in future I will pick up Americana. But yeah, it's kind of the after effects of this collection. But I did really like it, and the standout stories for me, I really liked Jumping Monkey Hill, which was kind of a delightfully sarcastic take on something which is eerily reminiscent of the Kane Prize Writers' Workshop, which I think Adichie has attended one edition of, so one wonders how much of it is reimagining and how much of it is, let's say, semi-autobiographical. And I really liked On Monday of last week, which had a delightful twist in it. So yeah, that was my recent reads. I hope you enjoyed hearing about them. If you've read any of these books and have any thoughts of them, please do leave them down below. And if not, well, I will see you next time. Bye bye.